or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hi, this is Dick Shanley, and for the next hour I will be reading from Sunday's June 14th issue of the New York Times opinion section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. This article is written by Maureen Dowd. Epstein haunts the White House. Spells are all the rage. As Bloomberg reported this past week, brides are buying $14 spells from watches on ETSY to ensure that their $100,000 weddings are not marred by blizzards or downpours. The Blumhouse low-budget horror sensation Obsession, which is helping lure Gen Z back to theaters, is about a young man who buys a one-wish willow, a magic stick that grants a wish. He desires to win the love of a comely young friend, but the obsession goes gruesomely awry. President Trump might try scrolling Etsy for bespoke spells. Nothing else is working to banish the creepy specter of Jeffrey Epstein. Many in Trump's conspiracy-prone base feel that they have not gotten the full story on the heinous pedophile, and they haven't. Whether Trump's lack of candor was to protect his friends or protect himself, it's all still murky. Trump knows who he is and what he did with his longtime pal, but he's doing his best to keep it from us. No amount of macho beatdown in the UFC cage matches on the White House lawn will make anyone forget Epstein's depredations. But one thing is clear. No matter how much Trump wishes him away, Jeffrey Epstein is continuing to haunt Trump and is persisting as a national obsession. The House Oversight Committee had closed-doors meeting last week trying to get to the bottom of the murk. One of the world's richest men, Bill Gates, continued his humiliating marriage-busting confession about Epstein, telling the committee that the spidery pedophile tried to blackmail him over his affairs. As it turns out, the president and his advisors were just as obsessed with Epstein as everybody else. In an article in the Times based on reporting for their upcoming book, Regime Change, Inside the Imperial Presidency of Donald Trump, Maggie Hagerman and Jonathan Swan conjured a group of stupid, craven, power-hungry people who inflame a panic about pedophilia among the elites, propelling Trump forward before it all goes sideways and comes back to bite them. Many in the White House, including the president and Pam Bondi, had either grossly underestimated or simply been blind to the voracious appetite of the MAGA base for information about Epstein. They were shocked that the president's broy friendship with a monster concerned the very same people whom Trump world had been stoking up for years on this subject. The authors revealed a stunning scene where Trump advisors met clandestinely one July last year to figure out how to get control over the Epstein story. J.D. Vance, Susie Wiles, Todd Blanche, Steve Young, Caroline Levitt, and others gathered blasphemously in the Situation Room, a place designed to steer combat operations, not political rescue missions. Bondi and Kash Patel joined via speakerphone. Talk about a situation. The vice president was panicky. The authors wrote, he seemed to subscribe to the darkest theories about Epstein and a cabal of predators hidden within the country's ruling class. He had been pushing for the release of all the files. Vance had also floated to colleagues an extraordinary PR gambit that the White House enlist Tucker Carlson to interview Epstein's longtime girlfriend and co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell in prison. Haberman and Swan wrote it might help the president if Maxwell was willing to state that Trump had not been part of any wrongdoing with Epstein. Even as Trump used the government to exact petty revenge, Epstein was posthumously getting revenge on Trump by trying to shake him off and claim they weren't that close and he was not a fan. Beyond the scenes, Haberman and Swan wrote, the Epstein crisis was paralyzing the Trump administration to a far greater extent than the public knew. After the article ran 19 Epstein survivors came out against Blanche's nomination to be Attorney General. In the Situation Room, someone mentioned an uncorroborated accusation about Trump and a girl in Epstein's sex trafficking ring named Jen, who told another victim that she had sex with Trump and that he had a predilection for nipples, aggressively sucking and flicking hers. This was surprising since Trump's previous comments had him focused on grabbing another part of women's anatomy. Vance argued for releasing the nipple-related documents while Wiles swatted him down, saying the president should not like it. One official called it surreal to be discussing nipples in the White House Situation Room, Haberman and Swan wrote. And that, ladies and gentlemen, has to be one of the most correct paragraphs ever printed in the New York Times. The president and his team did their best to nip the Epstein story in the bud, but no spell on earth can make it end. The future. The U.S. is the future of soccer, for better or for worse. World football is remaking itself in the spirit of American sports capitalism. Not long ago, a small, or if you want to get technical about it, large indicator of American soccer culture, 21st century transformation, appeared in the night sky above Midtown Manhattan. Just after the sundown on May 31, the LED lighting system at the top of the Empire State Building snapped on, stripping the tower's upper facade and spire red and white. It was a tribute to the Arsenal, the storied North London Soccer Club, which had clinched the English Premier League Championship a dozen days earlier. Arsenal's first league title in 23 years touched off ecstatic celebration in Britain's capital and in capital cities around the world, from Melbourne, Australia, Jakarta, Indonesia, to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Similar scenes played out not far from the Empire State Building when a loss by Manchester City sealed the championship for Arsenal on May 19th. Joy is dying hard, poured out of bars in lower Manhattan and Brooklyn, many wearing the club's red and white jerseys. The following weekend, Mayor Zoran Mamdani, an Arsenal supporter since childhood, was in the crowd in a packed Brooklyn sports bar to watch the team's last match of the Premier League season and to cheer the ceremonial trophy. Lift followed the final whistle. Again, the party spilled out into the streets, where the mayor had another celebrity Arsenal superfan, Spike Lee, join the throng, waving flags and singing terrorist chants. For decades, soccer's place in American life was marginal and subculture. At the turn of the century, top European clubs like Manchester United and Real Madrid had become huge global brand names. Marquee attraction was not just the planet's most ubiquitous sport, but arguably its dominant form of mass culture, up there with Hollywood movies and pop music. Yet in the United States, world football remained a fringe obsession shared by a hardcore of expats and American fans who faced a cheap challenge just to tune in games with Europe's top leagues. To watch the weekly action in the Printers League, Spain's La Liga, Italy's Serie A, and the German Bundesliga required subscription to specialty cable servers or expertise in the internet dark arts. Some of us can recall spending our Saturday mornings hunched over a laptop, gaping helplessly at a buffer feed of Bayer Leverkusen Werder Bremen match on the illicit peer-to-peer streaming site. You felt like a ham radio operator trying to contact Mars. The American press, meanwhile, was indifferent to even the biggest soccer news. Last time Arsenal won the Premier League in the legendary Invincibles campaign in 2003-04, when the club went undefeated, the story barely blipped on U.S. media. In this newspaper, on the day after Arsenal's final game, the team's achievement garnered a 3-sentence wire service write-up in sports briefing column, sandwiched between an item about an NFL running back violation of the league's substance abuse policy and an update on a third-round leaderboard at a golf tournament in Franklin, Tennessee. Things have changed. Today's soccer, like espresso, yoga, and other once exotic imports, is an ambient, everyday presence in American life. On our digital devices, on the street, and quite literally in the air, flashing on the skyline of the nation's biggest city. The day before the Empire State Building lit up, CBS Sports drew a record viewership, the largest audience for a club soccer match in U.S. English language TV history. For the broadcast, another Arsenal match, the UEFA Champions League final, NBC Sports broadcast on the Premier League reached millions of viewers on match weekends, and not just in the coastal metropolis, where one expects to find soccer connoisseurs. Markets that include local audience share include New Orleans, Granville, Spartanburg, Minneapolis, Cincinnati, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Buffalo. A report issued this year by Nielsen, the media analytic company, found that Americans spent 80 billion minutes watching soccer in 2025. In the U.S., Nielsen concluded soccer just passed from emerging interest to cultural infrastructure anchored by a fan base over 60 million strong that ranks 5th in the world. Another survey conducted by the London-based market research firm Ample Analysis determined that soccer had overturned baseball as Americans' self-declared third favorite sport, behind football and basketball. The trend coincides with the most significant soccer event to take place on these shores in a generation. The 2026 FIFA Men's World Cup, hosted by the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, kicked off on Thursday in Mexico City. It is the largest ever edition of the quadrennial tournament, with 48 teams competing in 104 games, 78 which will take place in this country's of 11 cities. In a moment to take stock of the altered landscape, 4 decades soccer posed a riddle of American exceptionalism. What would it take for the world's most powerful country to get on board with humanity's favorite sport? The change, it turns out, came slowly and then with shocking speed, transforming the United States into just a bona fide soccer, but a novel, and an unusually influential one. It's a story that holds a heady plot twist. For better and more to the point, perhaps for worse, Americans may not have joined soccer's universe so much as soccer has embraced America. One thing is certain, we have traveled far from 1994, when the U.S. first hosted the World Cup, and pundits greeted the arrival with incomprehension and scorn. World Cup soccer is coming to the United States, and I don't care. Soccer is un-American, proclaimed the cynic economist Charlie Reese. In a much-discussed article written in advance of the tournament, USA Today's Tom Weir compared the case made by soccer's boosters to what Russians told us about communism. We're assured readers that they hadn't felt bad about their soccer phobia. Hating soccer is more American than mom's apple pie. Huh. Of course, it is literally true that soccer is un-American, and there are interesting things to say about the difference between the rules and rhythms and those of football or basketball, but soccer's critics preferred crude cultural war framing. Back in 1986, during a House debate on a resolution to support the U.S. bid for the 1994 World Cup, Jack Kemp, a New York Republican, former NFL quarterback, condemned soccer as European socialist. Right-wing commentators took the trope out for a spin roughly every 4 years. When during World Cup rolled around during the 2010 tournament, Mark Thiessen, a one-time George Bush speechwriter, wrote an essay for the Conservative American Enterprise Institute denouncing soccer as European statist and collectivist. Capital sports are exciting, Thiessen explained. People often hit each other, sometimes even score. Soccer fans are excited by an egalitarian 0-0 tie. The Russian oligarchs and Persian Gulf potentates who own some of the soccer's most glamorous clubs might have been surprised to learn that they were involved in a leftist mutual aid project. Huh. Soccer's U.S. partisan had their own set of misguided ideas for decades. The nation's soccer's leadership, a loose coalition of bureaucrats, benefactors, and evangelists, affiliated with the U.S. Soccer Federation, the sport's governing body, imagined that fan culture would flourish when the United States developed talent that could stand with the best from overseas. They placed faith in youth soccer, which by the time of the 1994 World Cup solidified its place in one of the most popular participation sports for youngsters in the country. The trend gave the political world a new term to use and abuse, soccer mom. An earlier attempt to create a top-flight U.S. professional league, the NASL, collapsed in the 1980s. But 1996 brought a promising successor, Major League Soccer. Soccer boosters dreamed big, envisioning a time when the nation's soccer-mad youth would come of age, flooding MSL with homegrown stars and turning the country into a perennial contenders in international competition. In fact, the United States was already a global power in women's soccer. The passage of Title IX in 1972 and the underdeveloped of the women's games in traditional soccer national gave the USA a leg up. The U.S. women's national team won the inaugural FIFA Women's Cup in 1991 and went on to take the competition 3 more times, including in 1999, a victory sealed by Brandi Chastain's instantly mythic shirt-off celebration. Yet those triumphs did not alter the underlying equation. Millions of kids played soccer in the 90s without becoming lifelong fans. MSL matured into both a solid professional league and a kind of high-end retirement colony for European superstars. But it has never approached the level of America's top pro sports leagues, as its backers hoped. In fact, the U.S. Super Brain Trust had a faulty theory of the case. The breakthrough that drew in millions came not with the flowering of the domestic game, but when Americans gained entry to a universe beyond their borders. Over the past decade and a half, the landscape of American soccer fandom has been transformed, like more or less everything in the 21st century, by new technology, by streaming service, social media, and other digital platforms that offer previously unimaginable access to the wide world of soccer. Live matches, highlights, memes, podcasts, transfer news, tactic breakdowns, rumors, gossip, an unfathomable amount of plenitude of soccer action, analysts, and scullabout is now at our fingertips, being at the sci-fi walkie-talkie we carry everywhere. The result for American devotees is a surreal reversal of the old condition. Fans who once inhabited a soccer dead zone may now find themselves in a better position as viewers of live broadcasts than Europeans whose homes sit steps from the stadium where the matches are held. This past season, live stream of all 380 Premier League games were available to me through 2 subscriptions, roughly 100 more than fans in England could view because of British blackout rules. Sports media in general increasingly internet-based, but the decentralized nature of soccer, its fragmentation across continents, countries, time zones, languages, make an ideal fit for the online era. Soccer's popularity can be harder to perceive than, for instance, the NFL or NBA because of its dispersed among so many leagues and tournaments, not to mention interface and apps. The way an American engages with soccer bears less resemblance to traditional sport than to the modern consumption of pop music, another globalized culture form that has been transfigured by algorithms and streaming media. An editorial comment. I'm a golden oldie, and reading about all this technology leaves me in last place. Unsurprisingly, the vanguard of American soccer fans, based on digital native numbers of the millennial and Gen Z generations, but it's hard to generalize about an audience that is so large in number and so varied in its orientation. Some fans primarily follow Mexico's Liga, one of the most watched soccer leagues in the United States. Others concentrate on the UEFA Women's Championship League or the domestic National Women's Soccer League. Soccer is a gambler of geography. A teenager in Houston might pledge allegiance to Barcelona or Liverpool. His sports idol might be Galatasaray. I'll spell that for you. Galatasaray. Striker Victor Osimhen, a Nigerian star of a Turkish team. Many soccer observers are only secondarily interested in, as it were, in IRL sports. Their focus is EA Sports FC, one of the best-selling video games in the U.S. and a key soccer entry point that has schooled countless young people in the intricacies of transfer markets, promotion, and relegation, and other areas. For years, Americans have been regarded as unsophisticated soccer watchers, enthusiasts maybe, but not connoisseurs. It's a stereotype that still holds sway in many corners. A prominent peddler of the narrative of the hit comedy Ted Lasso, whose premise is a corn-prone football coach from Kansas who knows nothing about soccer, is put in charge of a professional team in London. Construe the sport as one of those mystifying European things like an old master paintings or the humane social welfare system that American rubes are incapable of comprehending. But in 2026, U.S. soccer followers occupy the same internet as fans in England and Brazil and are likely to be steeped into the wonkery of three-box, position, expended goals, and other fine points of tactics and analytics discourse. The most striking aspect of American soccer culture is the diversity. It's multicultural and multilingual. Many fans have global connections and transformational. There's a notable gender mix. A recent YouGov survey found that nearly one-third of serious soccer followers are women. Immigrants have long formed the bedrock of American soccer audience, and this remains the case. The scale of U.S. soccer's fandom is inescapable from the country's enormous Latin American, African, Arab, and Asian diasporic population, whose roots span nearly every major soccer-playing region in the world. In short, America's soccer fans may well more accurately reflect the nation's demographic future than fans in other sports. To put the matter another way, the soccer fan base looks a lot like the future than the sitting U.S. president and his supporters have vowed to eradicate. One surprising development in the run-up to the World Cup was how little anti-soccer hysteria bubbled up from the MAGA boglands. On the contrary, in December, President Trump went so far as to say that the NFL should remain American football, since the real football clearly is the game when you kick the ball around. The president made these remarks at the World Cup draw in Washington, where he was presented with an award invented just in time for the occasion, the FIFA Peace Prize, by Gianni Infantino, FIFA's president. Infantino likes to intone high-minded odes to soccer as a force of global unity, but he's a man very comfortable in the company of the world's warmongers and demagogues. The recent history of soccer's governing body has been marred by corruption and scandal, and in the current century, the sport has otherwise been overrun by morally dubious actors, foreign wealth funds, pet tri-state-based owners, and other plutocrats, and soft power operators. It's a scene where Donald Trump should feel right at home. Indeed, one of the defining soccer stories of our time is the arrival in Europe of American billionaires and investment firms that have swooped and scooped up some of the sport's most glittering prizes, including Manchester United, Arsenal, Chelsea, ASA Roma, AC Milan. Historically, clubs in Europe and around the world have been intensely local institutions, often rooted in working-class neighborhoods and strong civic identities. But in recent decades, world football has embraced an American business model, managed teams as global entertainment branding that maximize profits through sponsorships, merchandising, and the cultivation of fan base thousands of miles from the home turf. An irony lurks here. For many stateside soccer addicts, the sports allure lies in part in the folkways of traditional fandom, matchday rituals, coordinated chanting, banner waving, scarf waving, the fervor of the Derby showdown, age-old rivalries, and unserving development to your club. Yet, increasingly, these local practices are imperiled, or at least diluted by the very force that allowed Americans to catch on in the first place. Americans have not simply fallen in love with foreign sport. They've fallen in love because the sport has substantially been remade in the image of American capitalism and marketed to them, USA style. These days, it is loving soccer, surely. That's as American as apple pie. Another editorial comment, I guess because of my age, when I'm out with friends who love to talk basketball, basically football, sometimes a little baseball, soccer is never, ever mentioned. But the way the article because of technology, it appeals to a different cadre of sports enthusiasts. What did Mexico ever do to deserve such a measly tip? In 1913, at the age of 71, the American writer and journalist Ambrose Bierce crossed the border to join Pancho Villa's troops in one of the final letters before his disappearance, since he wrote, "To be gringo in Mexico. Ah, that is euthanasia." The relationship between Mexico and the United States, it's fair to say, has always been intense. Today, the tension is impossible to ignore. Under President Trump, the United States has bullied Mexico, led by left-leaning Claudia Sheinbaum, with threats and tariffs. Recently, Washington issued a demand for the extradition of 10 Mexican politicians, including sitting governor of Sinaloa, for collaborating with drug cartels. With around 80% of Mexico exports going to the U.S., Ms. Sheinbaum has done her best to appease her counterpart. But Mr. Trump is implacable. This is setting which to be our countries join as co-host of the World Cup. In football, the standard in global English, social tensions will always find a mirror. The sport is one domain where the country has long had the upper hand over the United States, but for years, the tournament, the hierarchy, has been reversed. After hosting two of the best tournaments in history, the one that consecrated Pelé in '70 and one dominated Maradona in 1986, Mexico received only 13 of 104 available matches. The U.S., whose football culture we've done so much, still hosts 78. Our collective feeling is that we've been reduced to a bit player, a humiliating downgrade when you consider how much football means to the Mexicans. What have we done to deserve such a measly tip? Our neighbors' indifference to the game was once so great that it preferred to play as the visiting team. In January 1954, something remarkable happened. Both our qualifying matches against the U.S. ahead of the World Cup in Switzerland were played in Mexico. We celebrated the goal-laden victories of 4-0 and 3-1, as if we reclaimed Texas. As the decades wore on, we lost the privilege of feeding the country upon which our economy depends. Men's football in the U.S. has improved significantly, and the country dominates the women's game. A sport that was once a guilty pleasure now fills the stands. The paradox is that we Mexicans have contributed to the improvement of our adversary. Immigrants played a key role in the energizing stadium in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York that helped foster the creation of a competitive domestic league. Roughly 40 million people of Mexican origin live in the U.S. Their nostalgia is good for business. They spend vast sums to attend games and wave the Mexican flag. Mexico's national team plays like the home side all across the United States, with only a few exceptions like Alaska and Hawaii. The Mexico Football Federation, driven by profit, takes full advantage of its migrant fan base. Our national team plays 2/3 of its friendly matches in the U.S., which has caused widespread discontent at home. The people have become yet another export commodity. It's no surprise it was booed during the reopening of Mexico City's renovated Estadio Azteca in March. That night, the extraordinary price of World Cup tickets coincided with the lack of success. As the Mexican teams is known, south of the border, football has been losing steam. In the U.S., however, the game no longer takes place in the shadows. 1994 World Cup was difficult to secure and required diplomatic maneuverings by the likes of Henry Kissinger. In 2026, the audience and commercial aspects are guaranteed. What's strange is that today's money-making scheme depends on a highly unusual arrangement. One host is a star, while the others have been cast in supporting roles. Gus Faust has a prologue set in heaven. The most recent World Cups have had their stage in purgatory. Russia and Qatar won their hosting bids with bribes. And not long after the FBI opened an investigation into those payoffs, the U.S. won its bid. The project reached unity and expand the market. Mexico and Canada were pulled in as co-hosts of the 26th tournament. Meanwhile, a country that won't be on the field is winning a silent contest, proving there is more than one way to participate in the World Cup. In Mexico City, street stalls, national team jerseys cost $115, while counterfeits range from $11. They're identical and come from faraway identity to circumstance. We'll be cheering for our national team wearing jerseys made in China. Not all is lost. Time and again, football has demonstrated the capacity to produce antibodies against the threats and besiege it. Before the World Cup in Qatar, there was justified criticism of a country that violates human rights, lacks footballing tradition, has temperatures so extreme that games must be played in air-conditioned stadiums. Despite those shortcomings, we still witness a tournament that was, in sporting terms, one of the history's best. The World Cup exists to transform reality into illusion. The tournament kicked off Thursday with Mexico's 2-0 win against South Africa. Nothing could top the miracle of Mexican fans bringing together. It will continue to conjure single winners. Lionel Messi represents veteran experience, while Lamine Yamal embodies youth. When Yamal was an infant in a family of migrants, he was bathed by Messi in an FC Barcelona photo shoot promoting UNICEF. Did the Argentina star anoint Spain's future genius in the manner of a legend, designate him as his successor? This is his dream magic. Football. Another editorial comment. There's a third article. Consider the New York Times spending 3 articles on soccer, or from now on, which I have to call football. The next article is written by Jamel Bowie. The Supreme Court does not own the Constitution. It is the job of the judiciary, as Chief Justice John Marshall famously wrote, to say what the law is. Often this is taken to mean duty to interpret the Constitution and fix its meanings in place. But to say what the law is and to say what the Constitution means are two different tasks. The law concerns cases and controversies, the application of past precedent and broad principles to present circumstances. Constitutional meaning is more abstract. It deals with the shape and structure of our political community. And as much as courts help build our collective constitutional understanding, the question of meaning is much the purview of the public, as is the job of a jurist. It is only in the last half-century, in fact, that we have fully conflated legal decision-making with the production of constitutional meaning. In past eras of American politics, the people, through the representatives in Congress, have shaped and settled constitutional meaning, rebuking the court when it overstepped the role of legitimate actor. The paradigmatic example is the reaction of the Supreme Court in Dred Scott versus Stanford in 1857, when the Republican Party organized itself to run opposition to that decision and fought to invalidate and overturn it through legislation and constitutional reform. But there are other sources of constitutional meaning beyond legislation and electoral politics. It is worth remembering that the Constitution was neither ratified by the Confederation Congress nor state legislators, nor the secretive committee that drafted in Philadelphia. It was ratified by state conventions assembled from a broad part of the public, or at least as broad as I could imagine, in 1787, that were meant as much as possible to initiate the people as sovereign whole. The Constitution was not written as a democratic document, but the Revolution unleashed a spirit of democracy that structured the way Americans understood the document before them and shaped its implementation at the hands of their elected representatives. This public exercise in constitutional making, which is to say the meaning of constitutional, did not end with ratification in 1788, nor did it end with the passage of the Bill of Rights in 1791. In addition to the constitutional debate and disagreement that marked the practical politics of the first decades of American Republic, there was the convention as a political institution, which survived as a vehicle for constitutional argument and for shaping the larger constitutional landscape. The most consequent of these conventions linger in our historical memory. The secession conventions where slaveholders debated the meaning of the Union and the decision to separate, and the Seneca Falls Convention, where delegates resolved to integrate a vision of women's equality in the constitutional order. But some of the most influential conventions in American history are well off public radar. They are the colored conventions, gathering of black Americans held throughout the 19th century, beginning in the 1830s and in the 1890s. It was in these conventions that black Americans, either born free or firmly enslaved, articulated a constitutional vision of their own. That vision would go on to play a critical role in the constitution making of the Civil War and Reconstruction. To read the minutes and resolution of these conventions, in fact, to see these black Americans articulate a broad-minded and ambitious democratic egalitarianism. Resolve reached at the Declaration of Sentiments in the 1848 Colored National Convention in Cleveland. Frederick Douglass served as its presiding officer. That we shall ever oppose every action emanating from the source it may, whether civil, political, social, or religious, in any manner derogatory to the universality, equality of man. 10 years later, at the suffrage convention of the Colored Citizens of New York in Troy, delegates condemned the Scott decision as an imprudent and atrocious attempt to extend and perpetuate the blasting curse of human bondage, declare that slavery is the common enemy of man, and that all who subscribe to the theory of human rights set forth in the Declaration of Independence ought to trample in self-defense the dicta of Judge Taney beneath their feet as of no blinding authority. The possession of that right, says, is the keystone to the arch of human liberty. And without the whole may be at moment fall to the ground, while with it that liberty may stand forever. At the Colored People Convention of South Carolina of 1865, held in Charleston, the heart of the secession movement, delegates cloaked themselves in the words of the Declaration of Independence and call on their white fellow citizens to recognize the truth that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that on the American continent is the right of all, whether he came from east, west, north, or south. And although complexions may differ, a man's a man for that. Gans knows that the work of these conventions was known to Republican lawmakers. He writes that in the period Congress was considering making far-reaching changes to the Constitution to ensure freedom and equal citizens for black Americans, Republican senators, usually Senator Sumner, introduced into the congressional record the Alabama Color Convention, the Mississippi Color Convention, the Florida Color Convention, along with countless petitions from groups of black citizens. These petitions deeply influenced the work of the Reconstruction Congress as black ideas about the meaning of the Declaration of the Constitution made their way into both the Reconstruction and legislation, like the Civil Rights Act of 1867-1875. It almost goes without saying that the organized political activity of black Americans in the South played a critical role in ratifying those amendments as well. To look at the long history of the color conventions to see a potent example of the power of ordinary Americans to interpret, shape, and change the Constitution for themselves. The work of these men and women, some famous, others far less, is a reminder that we need not wait for politicians and judges to build a new constitutional world. We can articulate our vision of the political community and work to make it a reality using whatever means that are at our disposal. Americans have lost the habit of constitutional thinking. The muscle is weak, degraded from the grades of neglect. The convention movement, especially that of the Color Convention, is a model for how Americans might start to work themselves back into shape, prepare for the moment when the possibility of constitutional change moves from the fantasy to a concrete reality. Put another way, we tend to relate to our politics, we relate to everything in this country. As consumers, we pick and choose a set of predetermined choices. But we hope to recover and revitalize our democracy. We must start to think as citizens with duties, obligations, and the sovereign power to make our world anew. Steyer spent $558 million and lost. What a waste. Say this for Tom Steyer. He is persistent. Many billionaires, after blowing $342 million on a failed presidential run in 2020, would abandon the idea of trying to buy themselves a high-profile political office for which they were unqualified. Not Mr. Steyer. He just dropped $260 million on a failed bid for California governor. His was the most expensive primary campaign in the state's history. Even by the standard of self-funded vanity campaigning by the very rich, Mr. Steyer, a hedge fund manager turned climate activist, distinguished himself thanks largely to spending $201 million on campaign ads. He outpaced a host of notable self-finders from the past, including David Trone, who spent $60 million unsuccessfully running in Maryland's 2024 Democratic state primary. Or Mehmet Oz, also known as Doctor, who spent nearly $27, being defeated for a Senate seat in Pennsylvania. And Linda McMahon, who spent $97 million on losing Senate races in Connecticut. Adjusting for inflation, Mr. Steyer came close to matching the self-funded flameout Mick Williams, spent $144 million to her campaign for California governor 2010. Mr. Steyer has now spent more than $500 million on failed campaigns. To be fair, California is an expensive place to run for office. And Mr. Steyer's spending spree was nowhere near the $1 billion that Michael Bloomberg dropped in just 104 days on his 2020 campaign for president. Still, it was quite the endeavor. Billionaires are more or less free to spend their money however they like, but surely all the money could have been better spent on something, anything else to help Mr. Steyer's fellow Americans. The possibilities are many and varied. Address California's near apoplectic housing crunch, subsidize the construction of affordable units, fund community and trust help keep housing stock affordable, support ballot measures of candidates not named Steyer, based on reforming the state's zoning and regulatory insanity. Beef up the roster of teachers. There is a dire teacher shortage in many parts of California. Fund scholarships or service programs aimed at putting aspiring education into undeserved areas. Subsidize the kids. Even with increases in public funding, the demand for affordable care significantly outpaces the supply, especially for infants. The average cost of subsidized care has reached $1,700 a month. Donate to Planned Parenthood. Thanks to President Trump's funding frenzy, 57 clinics in 20 states have closed for consolidated since the beginning of his term, according to a report by KFF. Fund a pro-vaccination education and public service campaign. Someone needs to save American people from the quackery of the Health and Human Service Secretary. Help defray the legal expense of the immigrants swept up in the Trump administration. Support groups focused on safeguarding the integrity of elections. Right on schedule, Mr. Trump is spreading his election fraud nonsense again. Alternately, fund a one-shot project with plenty of spice. Pay for a chunk of Mr. Trump's god-awful White House ballroom so regular taxpayers don't get stuck with the tab. After hitting it big in the private sector, many America's super rich delude themselves into thinking that they are masters of the universe, destined to dominate in every arena. See Elon Musk does Doge. And because they have so much money, they are accustomed to having pretty much everyone indulge in their wild fantasies. At least Jeff Bezos settled for buying himself a seat atop the Met Gala. Consider this pathetic phenomenon yet one more reason the American people, or at least California, should demand a more rational way to fund political campaigns. Until then, let's raise a glass to California voters for refusing to have their heads turned by Mr. Steyer's millions. Editorial comment, I often think, like, he raises this money, $144 million, the campaign cost. Where does this money go? Do they pay staffers? I guess they must. Does it go to advertisers? That it must. So when these billionaires spent money, I guess they're not helping humanity, but they're helping a few, whether it be advertisers or staff workers. Columnist Michelle Goldberg, Ossoff is breaking through. Kicking off his re-election campaign at a rally on land in late May, Senator Jon Ossoff barely mentioned the last two Republicans who were on runoff to oppose him. Instead, speaking to a crowd of more than 1,500 at a downtown concert venue, he blasted the self-dealing of Donald Trump as his Mar-a-Lago Mafia. He's trying to put his face on the money, Olaf said. Did you see that? He's building a monument to himself. But see, Atlanta, he's doing these things now because no one will honor him when he's gone, because he's a failed president and a national disgrace. The scale and reach of the Trump's family self-enrichment so astonishing it can test the limits of human cognition. So when Ossoff talks about it, he usually picks one example to zero in on. In that kickoff speech, he forces on tungsten mining rights in Kazakhstan. I may not pronounce that right. Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan. Ossoff described how the president of Kazakhstan granted U.S.-backed company the right to mine the world's largest known undeveloped deposit of tungsten, an element used in semiconductors, light bulbs, and warheads. 6 days after a company backed by Trump's sons Eric and Don Jr. took a 20% stake in an American mining company. That group's parent company received $1.6 billion in federal financing. $1.6 billion of your tax dollars to fund and finance their mining project in Kazakhstan. All the while you pay more for gas, for groceries, for health care. As often happens with those speeches, clips from the one I attended went viral online, where people from across the Democratic ideological spectrum have been buzzing about a possible Ossoff presidential candidacy. If Ossoff wins re-election, wrote the progressive journalist Maida Hansen, he immediately becomes one of the favorites for the 2028 Democratic presidential nomination. Sarah Longwell, a former Republican strategist who now published the anti-Trump bulwark, posted a photo of Ossoff with the words, "President maxing so hard." If you were looking up an ideal 2820 candidate in a lab, he, and let's face it, it's probably a he, would look a lot like Ossoff. He's young and handsome, with a picture-perfect family, a beautiful wife who works as an obstetrician, gynecologist, and 2 small daughters. He's a Southerner from a reddish state with a history of wooing black voters. And he's a Jewish critic of Israel, who, as much as anyone in politics, has the potential to bridge the Democratic Party's agonizing divide over Zionism. But the excitement of Ossoff is generating. It's about more than demographics. It stems from his skill in eviscerating Trump's gluttonous profiteering, the president's brazen attempts to turn the country into the most squalid sort of kleptomocracy. In Ossoff's bid for re-election in the state Trump won in 2024, some expected him to tack to the center. Last year, J.D. Veen predicted that he had started praising Trump's agenda. Instead, Ossoff is excoriating Trump and his systematic corruption in a way that transcends the Democratic Party's progressive moderate divide. He couples that attack with an achingly earnest of patriotism. Ossoff's recent speeches, which he says he writes himself, have 2 parts. First, he dissects the rot in Americans' government institutions, a rot that he always knows predates the Trump and helped give rise to him. Then he lays out a liberal, pluralist version of Americans' identity to challenge the Trump administration's white nationalism. We're bound together by the same great national spirit that passed civil rights laws, defeated fascism, and landed men on the moon, Ossoff said in his kickoff speech. A bit later, he added, "This is what small men like Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and Stephen Miller will never understand, that our national greatness flows not through our blood or our genes, but through our ideas." Movements that have defeated authoritarian, most recently in Hungary, usually used precisely this form, a sweeping denunciation of corruption with a reclamation of national mythology. Across the decades and continents, corruption has been the fatal weakness of authoritarian regimes. Stanford politician scientist Anna Bonneke wrote in an essay last year. Widespread outrage over corruption helped topple Fernando Marcos in the Philippines. Victor.
The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability